All right, welcome back again, everybody. Hey, Rem, how's it going?
I'm doing all right. How you doing, buddy?
I'm all right. So
Well, I'm sweaty. I got to warn the people. I am sweaty.
You got sweaty balls.
Oh, it is bad. We've had a heat
Sweaty
wave.
balls.
Oh, yeah, that's without question. We've had a heat wave in New England now for a few days, and even though we're like in a room and it may seem like we got our shit together, it's like 90 degrees in here.
Do you know what the worst thing about this heat wave is? Especially for someone like me now who has technically a corporate job. There are days I can wear, because of what I do, I can wear I can wear jeans and all that. But the whole point is, in the summertime, I hate wearing like
polos,
long sleeve shirts and multiple, not long sleeve shirts, long pants in general.
Yeah.
I would wear shorts every day if I could. And yes, multiple shirts. I hate doing shit like that in polos. But I'm in an environment that is mostly like in the 60s. But then once you walk outside and you just get hit with that, you're like, I want to fucking die.
So if I look too shiny, fuck you.
Yeah, well, hey, whatever. I'd say we'll adjust it out in post, but no,
There's
I don't
no way
want
to
fucking do that.
Yeah.
All right, but so Rem, let's give a little backstory to this episode.
Yes.
And the backstory to this episode is about 3 weeks ago, one of our listeners on Twitter, Davey Boy, his real name is Dave Nielsen. He's someone I know from my real life, someone I grew up with. He is a former Marine. He, I don't know if he still does it because he does a lot of stuff with video games. Like he does stuff on Twitch.
Yeah.
And he makes a living. I'd love to have him on to talk about that.
That's cool.
But when he got out and he took advantage of the loans that you can get for being in the military. And one of the things he did was he started to go to school. And around the same time he started to go to school, he did bombing stuff when he was in the military.
Wow.
So he worked with a canine that was
cool.
trained on sniffing bombs. And when that canine was decommissioned, because yes, they make it very impersonal and they decommission, they don't retire, they decommission an animal.
Oh.
And they asked him if he wanted his animal back, because you know what happens if he says no.
They put him down.
They kill it. Yes, they kill it. So to him, it's a brother. To him, it's not an animal. It's a brother. It's somebody who protected him.
Yeah.
Somebody who saved him. He looks at them the same way he looks at another military prisoner.
Of course.
Somebody who had his six. It's someone who is family to him. So he brought him in. He retrained him for civilian life, and that didn't take much because he worked with him.
Mm-hmm.
But he got, like, light bulb went off, and he started to go to school to be somebody who could train other people to teach and train dogs who are getting decommissioned by police departments in the military.
Oh, wow.
Initially to help former soldiers, like soldiers with PTSD.
That's awesome.
So training the dogs to do similar jobs with similar personnel.
Wow.
Isn't that kind of cool?
That's very cool.
Yeah.
What a way to pay it forward.
So Davey loves the show, and every now and then he'll hit me up on the socials. And so 3 weeks ago, he sent me a screenshot, I believe, through Facebook Messenger, and the screenshot was of several books by the author Chuck Klosterman. Is it Klosterman or Klosterman?
Kloster, I believe.
Klosterman,
yeah.
okay. Because I was going to come on here and just say both because I wasn't
Well, you know,
entirely
maybe
sure.
we're wrong, but let's just go with it.
Okay. So the book, the first one that caught my eye was the 90's, and it's called The 90's, a book. And you had read, and one of the other books, and you had read that book.
Mm-hmm.
And what was the name of that book?
Sex, Drugs, and Cocoa Puffs?
Yes, that is it. Yes, that is the name of it.
And I think that I became familiar with him. I forgot to mention this through Spin, actually.
Yeah, because he did write for
magazine.
Spin. So if anyone who doesn't know, little backstory on Chuck Klosterman. Chuck Klosterman is a prolific writer. It's fair to say he's prolific.
Oh, dude.
He is prolific. He was born in 1972.
I'm with
I believe
you.
he's 51 years old. He was born in 1972. So he is a Gen Xer through and through. He has written 12 books. I've learned this. He's written 12
wow.
books. His focus is pop culture. But he's also written, as you said, he's written for, we've said, Spin, Esquire, The New Yorker. He wrote for ESPN. He also wrote with Bill Simmons for Grantland. And by the way, Bill Simmons is somebody who focuses on sports but ties in pop culture references. He is a direct descendant as a journalist of Peter Gammons.
Oh, wow.
Have you ever heard of Peter Gammons?
I don't think I have.
Okay, Peter Gammons is from Massachusetts. He wrote for the Boston Globe. He's a sports writer. He covered the Red Sox, and he was great at doing, like, he could be talking about the Red Sox and tie in, like, the song Tommy.
Oh, that's cool.
Or a Pinball Wizard. He could tie in things like that to his writing. It was brilliant.
Yeah.
So someone like Bill Simmons is the direct descendant. And I think Chuck Klosterman is very similar in styles like that.
Okay.
Tying in things of pop culture reference to what he's saying.
Yeah.
So that's something that tied me in. He recommended this book, very similar to the one Jared Burrell recommended to us about Gen Y. By the way, condolences to the Burrell family because his mother recently passed away.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear
And
that.
did see that on the socials. They did I want to say like I don't know if there was an obituary. So they did like a Facebook one. It read like an obituary and it was brilliant. But it is a loss, and have my condolences
Yeah, very
from my
sorry to
family
hear
and
that.
hers.
Very sorry to hear that.
But Mr. Nielsen gave me this book, and literally my wife and I went out to the nearest Barnes and Noble that does exist. They still do exist.
Mm-hmm.
And I found this book, the 90s, and I read it in 8 days.
So it's a pretty hefty book. Too.
Yeah, it's 337 pages, but it's a deep 337 pages.
Yeah.
And it goes everywhere with pop culture. So you may ask yourself if we're going to segment this episode. Like, I would never segment this, just way too much in pop culture.
Yeah, let's go with it.
Like, he literally he goes on these rabbit holes of the O.J. Simpson trial and just everything that went on behind that. One thing that references, like, that was like the first time we wanted to be part of the news. We wanted our 15 minutes. He pointed out like the Ford Bronco and how people are on the overpass holding signs.
Yeah,
to be
supporting
seen.
him.
Yeah, to be seen. Essentially, yeah, supporting whatever, but the point is to be seen.
Yeah.
Point is to be seen.
Look at me culture.
Yeah. He talks about a lot of different things about pop culture. He talks about the importance of The Matrix as a movie. He talks about the importance of grunge. He talks about the importance of the 1970s. And there's so many things I could itemize. He says the epitome of our love for the 70s and the 90s is That 70s Show.
Yeah.
It's just you could just make a show called it That 70s Show and people would watch. And it takes place in Wisconsin, like every other, like Happy Days in the 50s took place in Wisconsin. Laverne and Shirley in the 1950s,
Wisconsin.
a show from the 70s took place in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Let's put a fucking show in the 1970s
In Wisconsin. Hey, they nailed it too.
Like, Chuck Klosterman did a great job of that. One thing, I want to put this disclaimer out here. Unlike the book about Gen Y, and I'm not knocking those authors, they wrote an academic book. And I appreciate that because I like reading academic
But Klosterman
books.
is more
Klosterman's all
conversational.
about conversationalist, pop culturist, and this is where, again, I'm not knocking you guys. This is my takeaway from how you wrote it academically. Academic work, whether it's a book, whether it's actually getting educated, it falls into two major categories. You are either being indoctrinated or you're being taught to be a critical thinker.
Oh.
And that doesn't mean it has to happen that way, but that tends to be, in my opinion, that's my takeaway from when I was getting my education.
Yeah.
I was either just being indoctrinated in things I was learning, or there was plenty of opportunity where critical thinking, yeah, okay, great, you can read a fucking book and remember it. But how do you apply that practically?
Yeah.
Like, so that's where I was kind of getting at with when I was reading Klosterman in my mind. And so that is something I appreciate. That's why it's very hard for me to just kind of focus on these like couple topics.
Yeah.
So
I can
I'm gonna
understand that.
So what I'm going to do, because Remy, I've told Remy about the book.
Yeah, we've
Remy,
talked extensively, but like I said, guys, I've been off the grid. I've been hidden. So
Yeah.
this is more going to be Bob's thing, but
I want to say things so I can get Remy's like his reaction to him.
yeah, a lot of it
Sure.
was very interesting from
Yeah.
what you told me so far. And I love
Yep.
Klosterman. I
Yeah.
recommend people pick him up, and just because you feel like you're talking to someone way smarter than you, that doesn't make you feel dumb.
No, he's more just like a come on this ride with me, everybody. Come on. So before we start, and I'm going to bring this up multiple times like he did. Before we start, there are a couple things I want to lay the groundwork for. One of his themes, and he says it over and over again, is you have to stop looking at the past with your present mindset.
Which
And
is very hard
easier
to do.
said than done.
Mhm.
And I'm guilty of that because when I look back on the 90s, I look back on, depending on what part of the 90s, because I can do that. I was 8 years old when the 90s started and I was 18 years old when it ended.
Yeah.
That's just facts. That's just facts. And the early part of the 90s to me was magical. It was magical. And the mid 90s and the late 90s
Got more cynical.
it was not just more cynical. That's when my depression started to set in.
Yeah.
That's when I'm developing, and that's where like it just becomes very complex, and I'm just someone who I felt got lost in the shuffle mentally and emotionally. And I have very a mixed bag feeling about that. But if I'm on having a good day today and I look back on something nostalgically, that good feeling I have will try to
Seep into
it'll
the
try
memory.
to implant itself on a memory that I was not happy.
Yeah.
And sometimes I can, and it's harder as I get older, but I can be like, no, don't do that. That's not what it was like, Bob.
Redirect.
Don't lie to yourself.
Yeah.
Don't do that. So that's one thing he says over and over again. Another thing he points out, and this is one thing I did say to you, is he says that the idea of the 90s is not limited to 1990 to 2000.
Yeah, I loved this. This made a lot of sense.
So in Klosterman's opinion, the 90s began in 1989 with the fall of the Berlin Wall. That's a very worldwide, that's a large event.
Yeah.
And for anyone who doesn't know, that's literally the Berlin Wall separated East and West Germany because Berlin, that's literally the city, literally the two countries, because Russia took over one. We're talking the Cold War. We're talking communism. And East Berlin was communist. And there was literally a wall.
The wall.
And then they had the death line on the Russian side, on the USSR side, where there was like 25 feet. And they had like snipers, and they had barbed wire. They had like all this stuff, so you couldn't leave, or they made it very hard for you to leave. And this separated a country. This separated literally ideals of East and West, of communism and capitalism. And eventually, capitalism won. And literally, the wall fell, and people celebrated. And we got one of the most glorious, cringeworthy things ever.
David Hasselhoff.
We got David Hasselhoff wearing his Knight Rider jacket, now with literally like a fucking nightlight lights on the back. And he's on the top of the wall that hasn't been torn down. I'm talking about freedom. Like, dude. German people love David Hasselhoff.
They fucking love him.
Yeah.
He tours every year, and he's an icon.
But anyway.
They also liked Hitler, though, so.
Well, certain of them did.
I know, I'm just being a dick.
I know. But, so that's when the idea of the 1990s starts. So we're still in the 80s.
Yeah.
And the 90s follows the 80s.
But you're already seeing it. You're seeing glam music dying.
Yep.
You're seeing less techno, colors. You're seeing,
And on the other end, the end of the 90s, the feeling and the idea of the 90s is 9/11. Is September 11th, 2001. Like that is just, it's a dividing line. We talked about that.
Yeah, when you told me that, it gave me chills. Like, that's so fucking
we've
accurate.
talked about how it's a dividing line just for our society, for people, or all that. He's saying, no, the idea of the 90s continued into the 2000s, and then 9/11 just really just said, no, that was over.
Yeah, it's not working.
So that's some things we're going to play, but I'm going to talk about some things. There's too much to talk about in one episode.
Yeah,
but
it's a lot.
And I would rather people go read this book. It's a phenomenal book. It came out in 2020.
And I'm taking it home to read it, so.
Yes, I gave Remy my copy. It frees up some clutter in my house that my wife's probably happy about.
Cool. Cool.
All right, but we'll get into it. So the first thing I'm going to cover is I'm going to cover the years 1991 to 1992, because it doesn't matter if we're talking pop culture, music, or politics.
Iconic years.
It was iconic time. Rem, do you know who the president was in 1991?
We either had an old Bush or a young Clinton.
It was an old Bush.
Okay.
It was George Herbert Walker Bush.
That's what I thought.
And he had an approval rating
81 or something.
in the 80s.
Yep.
We had just gone into a war with Iraq because they were invading Kuwait. And this was the first time that war was covered on site.
Yeah.
24/7
journalism
by CNN and C-SPAN. Because Fox News was really just starting in the 90s, and so was MSNBC.
Yep.
And they were driving the narrative because they were just showing how we were just firing missiles. They weren't like following the soldiers as much. And when you do that, it makes the world war look like the Terminator.
Or a video game.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what's things that Klosterman talks about. And he talks about how it just made it look like we were like surgeons. And the war literally ended in like 90 days.
Yeah, I remember that.
It was over very quickly. And you would think after that this president, who already had an approval rating that was approaching 90%, was going to win in a landslide. Because the election was literally a year away.
Yeah.
And he lost. So what happened? And this is one thing that Klosterman talks about. How did that happen? What was going on around that time? So let's stick with the politics of the time.
All right, yeah.
Because he does something very well. Because yes, we had, for the Democrats, William Rodham Clinton.
Excuse me.
Bless you.
Oh, man.
So I'm not editing that out.
No, it's real. Billy Clinton, yeah.
And Bill Clinton, and this is why one thing that Klosterman talked about, I'm not going to make this its own standalone. I'm going to talk about it through everything.
Yeah.
Is he said in the 90s, we had an obsession with the 70s. That's nothing new. That tends to be what we do as people. Like people in the 80s were in love with the 60s. People in the 70s were in love with the 50s, stuff like that. So it's like a natural thing.
And even right now, think about it. We just saw Batman with Michael Keaton. So
That's
right now,
90s,
the
yeah.
90s and early 2000s are there.
But this is an area where I will slightly disagree with Klosterman's assessment.
Yeah.
Because do you remember, as a 10-year-old child, I remember what people were saying about Clinton. Do you remember what president they were comparing him to?
They were comparing him to Kennedy.
Exactly. And Kennedy was 1960 to 1963 until his assassination.
Charismatic, handsome, well-spoken.
To the point, do you remember, I remember this burned in my brain. On election day, do you remember what Bill Clinton, he voted in D.C., and then he went to Arlington National Cemetery, and he visited Kennedy's grave.
Because he knew.
And did the whole hand by the eternal
photo.
flame. Yep. Like, come on. He's aligning himself with Kennedy. He was positioned by boomers as the modern day Kennedy.
And he cheated like Kennedy.
He did. I think he cheated more than Kennedy.
Probably.
He just lived in a time where he got caught.
Well, he cheated worse than Kennedy because at least Kennedy cheated with Marilyn Monroe.
Sorry. Klosterman points out something because something happened that really hurt. And it was one of the first times ever that somebody really on this level did it, is that we had a third-party candidate come in. And do you remember that third-party candidate?
Ross Perot?
Yes.
I'm Ross Perot. I'm here, I'm little, and I'm mad.
So one thing Klosterman does is he shows how Ross Perot really gives you, if you think about it, he gives the foundation for how Trump ran in 2020.
Okay.
Because he's a billionaire.
Bravado.
He's bravado. He's an outsider.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where the comparisons end.
No, but I immediately...
That is where the comparisons end. Because ideologically, they are fundamentally different people. But he was attacking Bush. He was not attacking Clinton. And so all Clinton had to do was sit back. He had to just be like one thing he points out is Clinton never had to get aggressive, never had to go on the attack.
Yeah.
Because he had Ross Perot to do that. Ross Perot got 19 million votes.
Comparatively to what's the number of winning?
I think... So remember, it's the Electoral College. He didn't win any electoral votes.
Yeah.
But he essentially got like 10%
Wow.
of all votes that people had voted.
I mean, not bad for a little firecracker.
And after reading everything I did, I probably would have voted for him.
Really?
Because of what he stood for. He stood for things like we all would love to pay less taxes, but let's stop just increasing taxes to give money to all this stuff. Why don't we start investing in ourselves, in our country?
Yeah.
Like that right there is somewhat, Trump was kind of doing that stuff, but he was doing it more in a Reagan way.
So
let's get back to making America great again.
Did Perot, was it almost like a forebearer of Bernie Sanders?
No, because he was actually I think ultimately when you look back on the way that Clinton ran, how his presidency was, I think Ross Perot was similarly aligned to him.
Oh, interesting.
Like what I mean by that is Bill Clinton became basically a center-left president.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Like he moved away from the Democrat side and he moved towards, but he didn't go become Republican. He just moved to the center.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how he got a lot of stuff done, especially in his first term. Ross Perot was more of a right center, as I keep hitting that, but that's my bad. But he's more of a right center guy. He's like libertarian. He's a libertarian.
There you go.
Did you know that I found this fantastic? Did you know that at one point, because he was funding this his entire
I know, I do remember that.
That he left the election, he withdrew, and then he re-entered, like 2 months before the election.
Was it because of funding?
Nobody knows.
Oh,
Nobody knows. He just did that. Yeah, it was just wild. It's stuff that people kind of look at in the 90s and be like,
weirdo.
Yeah, weirdo. Like, but I find that if Trump did something like that today, it would be looked on positively.
People like, he's so brave. Yeah. We don't do politics
But anyway, what else happened especially in the fall of 1991, specifically on the same day?
Some of the best record drops in history.
On the same day, I believe it was September 26th, 1991.
Most likely a Tuesday, believe it or not.
Yes.
That's when they did releases.
Because then tended to be Tuesday was the day to drop an album. We had Nirvana's Nevermind drop. We had the Red Hot Chili Peppers' Blood, Sugar, Sex, Magic, and we had Tribe Called Quest's Low End Theory. All three of those albums came out on the same day. And then Chuck Klosterman goes into this, he goes on this lovely ride about grunge and about how just the zeitgeist, the spirit of grunge and the spirit of this musical movement is Kurt Cobain and Nirvana. And you know what? Because there was great music that we just showed how much great music was coming out, especially in grunge. Because Pearl Jam dropped 10 very shortly after that.
Very shortly.
Soundgarden and Alice in Chains
Bad
dropped
Motorfinger and Facelift.
Dirt.
Oh,
Facelift
you're
came
right.
out in
89.
89, 90, and Facelift, and Dirt came out in 92.
And we need to talk just for a second about the sonic leap between facelift in Dirt.
Yes.
Dirt
Because they're hair metal.
starts
Because they're
hair metal,
hair metal.
to painful grunge.
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome music. Awesome music. But the forebearers of grunge are Nirvana.
Yeah.
And he talks about how grunge is the last time that rock music
Has reigned.
has reigned supreme, has brought something different to the table, and is innovative.
Agreed.
It's truly the last time. And he also talks about how Kirk hated that.
Mm-hmm.
Like Kirk hated because he saw the writing on the wall that he alienated his people, because then the influx to Seattle
It was the Mecca at the time.
Yeah, and it just tore the scene apart. Like all you had to do was wear fucking flannel, and you would become an act signed by a major label.
Wasn't it Guess that did a grunge line?
Yes.
And it was like, that was the moments when you realized the thing that you were naturally was commodified.
Yep. And he hated that. And, he came from a tortured life. He did not have the greatest of lives.
No, it's
No,
bad.
he didn't. And at the same time, as his life is winding down because he took his own life, you have a new art form ascending. And that is hip hop.
Yeah.
And Low End Theory is just one of the many. Take your pick.
Now, well, keep in mind, we know that rap is Brooklyn based out of the 80s. We're talking
native tongue.
We're
type of
talking we're talking the true birth of hip hop.
like where West Coast, where basically NWA splits and everyone starts making their own records and showing how they're all individually like kick-ass hip hop artists on a different coast, away from New York City.
Guys like Jay-Z are coming up.
Yep.
Like it was nuts. And to have like you said, exposure to Low End Theory, Far Side, The Chronic, Doggy Style. It was a time.
But he focused on
blessed.
Tupac.
Yeah.
But he focused on Tupac Shakur because he said, like, if you think
Tupac
about it,
was the rap Cobain.
yeah, that's what he said. That's very good, Rem. That's what he says.
Oh,
he
cool,
said that they were the equivalents, and they both died young, both died at relatively the same age. However, they both, like, if you think about it, did Kurt Cobain, did he openly present, I came from like a rough upbringing, all this, or was it just more, I'm presenting my feelings on where I'm at right now?
The latter.
Yep. What did Tupac present?
I had truth.
I had a hard life. I have a hard life for all these reasons. But one thing Chuck brings up, did Tupac really have that hard of an upbringing?
Okay, I don't want to say no because I don't want to be canceled, but no, he was at a private school.
I was going to say, is it as rough as he presented it?
No.
Then that's what Chuck is saying.
Was he born in a jail cell to a Black Panther?
Yes, he was.
Yes.
Yes, he was.
Okay.
Yep.
Afeni Shakur, very strong woman. But then she was like, I'm going to give him the life I didn't have.
Yes.
So if you can find pictures of Tupac in high school, he's not your Tupac.
No.
He's in a business suit with a tie.
His into the industry was as a backup dancer for the Digital Underground.
Digital Underground with Humpty Hump.
Yeah. Like, and again, yeah, because I agree with you. Like, I'm not saying that there's no hardships. Of course he had hardships. But if you even see interviews that Tupac did, where he said he had to go seek it out.
Yeah.
He had to go seek it. He sought it out. I'll give him credit for that. He sought it out.
And he gave a voice to that life, though.
And he did. And it ultimately cost him his life.
Everything.
It cost him everything. And ultimately cost him his life. But, like, what Klosterman says is, neither one of them painted the picture of who they really were.
Agreed.
At their heart of hearts. And then he also says, and this is where I'm going to bring it back away from the cancel end, is that, and the shame of it is they were very similar people who were very complex people who were paradoxes, but we give more focus to the white artist than the black artist.
Yeah, in our culture.
I'll be fair to Chuck, he pointed that out, and it's true. It's true. It's true, because yes, in the 90s, you know what? You know
that's
what
heavy, though. We got to sit with that for a moment.
But do you know what our boomer parents were saying about Tupac's death in the 90s?
He deserved it.
Yeah, he got what he deserved. You live that life, you play
He
with
was a thug.
You play with fire, you get burned.
I think the real theory with Pac, at least for me, and I've talked to other people about this regarding
he doesn't dive into it, but he
touches on it.
He touches on it.
But I feel like fuck, I lost my thought. I'm sorry.
Were you going to talk about how he really, the things that went on behind how he really died?
Well, yeah, okay, thank you. I think a lot of people who have talked about it, and people who maybe have more insight into that lifestyle, there are people who think that Pac was killed because he had more reach to black youth than any politician, than any person. He was essentially becoming in a position of power. And white people or whatever were like, no, this can't happen. He's dangerous.
Chuck doesn't go to the conspiracy, he talks about it, but he kind of talks about it in a sense of, we can't really prove it though.
Yeah.
So it's just
hearsay.
It's hearsay. And sometimes he says hearsay.
And I think that, once you talked about these two, Cobain and Tupac, those motherfuckers probably would have had the best conversation had they met each other.
They did.
They did?
They have, yeah. Very, very, like only once, but very briefly.
That makes me happy.
And there is a picture. He didn't talk about it, but he talked about it in the book. But there is a picture.
I gotta look that up.
I believe it's a picture.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this was literally 91 and 92, like because Tupac's first album dropped in 92. I believe.
All Eyes on Me?
No, that was his last album when he was alive.
Okay.
I think it was it Tupacalypse Now or was it the one before that?
I'm not gonna even try. Yeah, I already fucked up.
No, it's okay. But so we have all this thing because people people of that age are the early to middle people of Gen X.
Oh wow.
Like Chuck. Chuck even said he was in college. He was a teenager or he was in his 20s.
Yeah.
And all of these people are people who can vote. And all these are people with a voice. And where's MTV? Rock the vote.
Mm-hmm.
Choose or lose. You remember that slogan?
Well, that's why Clinton won.
And that's another reason why. Because it's aligning. This is your president, Gen X.
He went on Arsenio and played saxophone. And like he knew.
The most cringeworthy thing, but you know what? He killed it.
And he'd have pictures taken eating at McDonald's and shit. And people were like, oh, I get this motherfucker.
Yep. Oh, he's an everyday asshole like me.
And he smoked weed but didn't inhale. Sure, Billy.
That
was a great one.
I did not inhale.
I kept it in my cheeks.
Just like I did not have
sex with that woman. Yeah, accountability was an issue for that man.
So, he talks about the idea of grunge, and he really aligns it to things around that time of Gen X. Like Gen X, a big ethos of Gen X is be authentic and don't be a sellout.
And we're not finding good jobs.
Yeah, we're very unhappy people.
Yep.
Very cynical people.
Grunge caught that in time,
and grunge picks that up, as he says. It's the fuzziness of the 70s heavy metal, like Black Sabbath would be the one you would think of.
Yeah.
And on top of that, it's dingy music that matches the geographic area that it comes
Rainy,
from.
Gross.
Yep, Seattle.
And if you're born in Aberdeen where Kurt was, you either work in logging or you learn how to play instruments and hope your band blows up.
Yep.
That's why so many people from Seattle, there's nothing to do out there. And if you don't cut down trees, you better at least know how to play a couple chords.
Now, would you think that he would even touch upon the movie Singles?
I would hope.
He didn't.
Yeah, I would hope
and
that.
And the reason he didn't is he did touch upon it by saying, yeah, everyone just moved to Seattle and put on flannel so they could get on a major label, and then everyone moved there, and then we made a movie about it, and some of the artists took a part in it. And he says that they asked Kurt, and Kurt said, "Fuck you."
I believe it.
Yep. Whereas he also talked about how Kurt would openly talk shit about Eddie Vedder.
Oh yeah, they had weird
but they ended up being pretty cordial. But the shit that Kurt would talk about Eddie would be like, well, yeah. You'd just be like, I am.
Yeah, I'm not as good as them. Yeah. We're not a punk band. Yeah. All this shit he's saying.
You guys are just trying to sell records. He's like, well, yeah.
And then but ultimately, I heard that. And I heard that Kurt was like, later in his life, he was like, I was too hard on that dude.
Yeah. Yeah. And then they reconciled. But because I bring that up because Eddie Vedder was in the movie Singles.
Yeah, he was.
So was Chris Cornell.
Chris Cornell, Lane Staley.
Yeah, Lane Staley was in that. They fully embraced that. But
Matthew Sweet might have been in it.
Yeah. But Kurt was someone who was like, nah.
I won't do it.
Kurt was like, I am not about that. And he tried to hold on to that. And he hints that probably played a pretty significant role in him taking his own life.
Yeah.
Like I can no longer live this. Now I've basically napalmed my own life.
And I've become the enemy.
Yes.
I've become who I made fun of.
Yep.
And the only way I can end it is by ending it.
Yep. Yep. And I thought that was very powerful and very true.
Yeah.
And it also shows the difference between him and Tupac. Like, 'cause Tupac was murdered.
Yep.
You know, Kurt murdered himself, for lack of a way of putting it.
Well, if Courtney, but that's another discussion.
But yes, the early 90s, again, this is the time when Gen X is coming to adulthood and shining. And he talks about things like also Seinfeld.
Yeah.
Seinfeld, he says Seinfeld is the show you think would be the show that is the representation of Gen X. But he says, do you know the show that ends up being the representation?
Friends.
Yes, Friends.
And I mean, I'm not a friend, not like some people.
But when he said that, do you know what I thought of?
What?
Well, which show did my sister is a Gen X. And what show did my sister watch? Friends.
Yeah.
Or Beverly Hills 90210. And he brought that up a little bit too.
That's true.
That those were the shows that were huge. And to be fair, because this is the way he pointed it. When Friends started out, because when we look back on Friends, we think that everything is iconic. They weren't trying to be iconic.
They just wanted to make money.
The Rachel haircut wasn't meant to be iconic. It was just a hairstyle.
And people loved.
And it took on a mind of its own. That band, I'll Be There For You.
Yeah.
It was literally a 30-second song, and then they had to add another chorus because it had to become a real song in 1995.
Yeah, remember that?
Yeah, I do. But I bring those things up because, like, it didn't start out that way. That's a theme that comes up for Gen X in the 90s. We're just being ourselves. And then you ran with it.
Yeah.
And made it into what it was.
You know what else? Like, I think that when I think about iconic 90s shows that captured the 90s and captured that time, you know what my first thought is?
What?
Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah. That's more late 90s, though, because that was 98 or 97.
No, that was on.
Well, do you mean the movie? You mean the Christy Swanson?
Oh, you're right. The show
because the movie was 92 with Paul Rubin.
Okay.
Yeah, that was 92.
Yeah.
And Luke Perry.
That might be mid 90s. You're
Luke
right.
Perry, may you rest in peace.
Dream on, buddy.
Yeah. So let's move on to the next kind of thing that I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, for sure.
So he talked about how the single sonic leap for technology in the 90s was the internet.
People forget that that's when that appeared.
He also says that the internet is the most overrated thing to come out of the 90s. And as Remy, you pointed out, the internet, when it first started, was literally just like encyclopedias online. I mean,
And like there'd be chat rooms where you'd just be like, hey, and people would be like, hey, that was it.
and then someone would get disconnected.
Oh, yeah.
And then it's like, oh, you don't want, oh, well, you're an asshole. And then it's like 20 minutes later, hey, sorry, I'm back on. And then it's like, and then they're back off. And then it's just.
And people don't realize, too, internet was metered at first.
Yeah.
You paid to use it like 5 days a month.
Yep.
And if like your kid got up at midnight and used it for 9 hours, your phone bill would have been like $850.
Yeah. So he talks about things, and this is one thing that blew my mind. So do you remember, you obviously know Ted Kaczynski.
Of course.
The Unabomber.
Unabomber, yeah.
His manifesto, which the FBI worked with like the New York Times and the Washington Post.
Yeah.
And they both posted his manifesto in total. And you know the story of how his brother recognized his mannerisms and his writing.
The handwriting, yep.
And that's how he figured out it was his brother. Do you know how he got a hold of all that? Email.
Oh.
Somebody sent him an email of the manifesto.
Wow.
Yeah. Somebody scanned was scanning the manifesto.
Yeah, you had to, page by page.
Page by page.
Wow.
Yeah, old school PDF.
Yeah.
Old school PDF.
Yeah, that's what it is.
And that's how he got it. So and he brought up the Unabomber because the Unabomber's manifesto was about how technology is going to destroy us. Like we're going to destroy ourselves with technology. And he hints at, well, what he did is heinous. He wasn't entirely wrong. He
was wrong with what he did, but not with what he said.
But he says that even though he only mentions the internet once in his entire manifesto as a casual kind of offhand comment, he says he was really talking about the internet. The internet is really the technology that's going to take us down.
I mean, people may hate him, but Kaczynski was genius level.
Yeah. Yep.
So
yeah. For anyone who doesn't know, the Unabomber literally just he lived off grid in Montana or Colorado, and he made bombs. He mailed them out and killed. He didn't kill a lot of people, but he hurt a lot of people. But he would do that, and he was on the run for like 20 years.
I mean, literally, you're talking about a fully bearded hobo living out in the woods.
Yeah.
So
who was completely free. Not always in a good way.
No, exactly.
No. But he also, so going back to Klosterman, so he takes that tie-in, and he's talking about the early days of the internet, and he talks about chat rooms, and he talks about how the early parts of the internet where they gave you when it really started to explode with Netscape, and but more so with Google in the late 90s. But he talked about how you could create your own anonymous personality, but that with great power comes great responsibility.
Oh, yeah, there
and
it is.
With that comes fear, because now we are more connected. Now we have less privacy. We are not as protected. And this is where society comes. This is one of the things he says throughout the whole thing. This is where society comes in, and society, specifically the news, can you just turn that off?
No, I did. The volume's off. That's why I just made a face. Hey, you've knocked your mic like 16 times.
I did, but I figured after the first time you do that, like you would do everything in your power to.
It's been down. I don't know why it went off.
I would go into my app settings and I would just. I'm sorry, man. Yeah, you should just tell them to leave you alone. Yeah. I'm kidding. I know, I just sidetracked us. All right, I'll get us back on track. All right. So I was talking about the internet. I was talking about we lose privacy.
Yeah.
We lose some of our freedoms, and we're more our security.
There you go.
Security is a risk. So that's what the news media does now. Because one thing that came out of the 90s, it started in the 80s, but it really started to pick up momentum in the 90s, where news media started to drive the narrative
100%.
instead of just objectively reporting the news.
Which started with
Fox News and MSNBC coming on the board, because now
I would even say Waco was when it
now
really
we have
started.
multiple. He touched on Waco and Ruby Ridge, but he was very neutral. He didn't take a stance. He just said, "Look, these are things that happened. These are things the news can't figure out things, so the news is just making up stuff. They're assuming. They're making up stuff and assuming." And that happens with the internet. So they play a lot on fear in the 90s. And it's not just I would argue, because he talks about it. He talked about Dolly the lamb.
Oh yeah, the first
time
animal.
we successfully cloned somebody. Or no, not somebody. We cloned something.
A living thing.
We cloned a living thing in the 90s.
Yeah.
And he talked about Dolly. But I would say that in the internet, those are sonic leaps.
Agreed.
For science and technology. And do you know what our response was? Bill Clinton actually put a bill before the Congress to say it was illegal to clone people.
Yeah, I heard about that.
And like and Congress was like, that's absurd and we're not doing it. And ultimately everyone's like, oh, is this lamb a freak of nature? All this stuff? It's like, no, the lamb lived for 7 years and died of natural causes.
They just made a lamb.
Yeah, they made they cloned something. He also pointed out how he finds it stupid that no one talks about identical twins. Because that's like nature's clone.
Yeah.
It's like
that's true.
And he said that they positioned it like it was Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
Oh,
that's that's the angle they go
a
with.
Freak mutant.
Yeah. And then on top of that, we have other technological leaps, not just the internet. Do you remember Biosphere 2?
No.
So, rich guy, and I have his name in my notes, I forget it. But he says how the 90s was the first time that really wealthy people decided that they could do stuff as well as the government. And that at times they crossed that line of we could do it better, or we know what's best for everybody.
Like what just happened with the Titan.
Yes. Yep. Exact. Thank you. So Biosphere 2 was a group of spheres that was made in the desert of Arizona. And it was literally made to be self-containing like an Earth, because Biosphere 1 is Earth. So, I mean, they made one dome to be a rainforest.
So that's what Biodome was about?
Or Biosphere. Yeah. And that's where I was going to go. I was going to go with it. Yeah.
Sorry, I got excited.
No. It's fine. Because he does talk about, he dedicates 2 pages to Pauly Shore in the book.
He's kind of iconic.
Yeah. But but these are all the reasons I'm going to give you guys to read the book, because I don't want to spoil those. I'll tell Remy off here. But anyway, yeah, Biosphere 2, like literally, like they had to create their own oxygen too.
So how long did it last?
It was supposed to last 2 years, and it lasted about 2 years. But at one point, they had to start pumping oxygen in.
Oh, wow.
Because the sweet spot's around like 22% of the atmosphere is air, is oxygen. And it dipped to like 14%. So it's like they're in the Alps.
Yeah, it gets dangerous.
So they had to start pumping in air, so it's no longer an experiment.
Yeah.
So all intents purposes, the experiment failed.
Wow.
And then there were 8 people that were living in there, and then they formed factions.
Oh my
God. And they didn't like, it wasn't anarchy. They were just more like, we're hanging out with these people, you're hanging out with
Democrats, Republicans.
Yeah. So I would say on that hand, it's kind of a success.
It worked.
Because that's what happens in reality.
Yeah.
It's just the way you meant it didn't work out. And the cool thing about that is Columbia University took it over and ran it for 8 years.
No kidding.
And they ran it as like a museum, but they ran it to do experiments in the different environments.
Oh, that's cool.
Related to global warming and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I would say its legacy is that it's, because it went from like 1993 through 1994. Well, and then, Coinky Dink, 1995, Biodome comes out.
Yeah, I'm saying. Yeah. But at least it wasn't like the Titan. People weren't risking their lives in that.
No.
You know, which is good.
No. And they tried to do it again in 1994. And Steve Bannon was the one who was like driving it. Steve Bannon, who helped Trump.
Yeah.
He was part of Trump's team. And that thing literally lasted 10 days. And then they all just walked out.
Wow.
Then we don't really talk about that. But he mentions that in the book. But let's tie it into Pauly Shore, because in 1995, someone just handed Pauly Shore and one of the Steve Baldwin or Billy Baldwin?
Yeah.
Steve Baldwin, the weakest. Yeah. As the Family Guy says. Yeah. But someone just hands them. They just hand them this and say, here's Biodome.
Yeah. Go do stupid shit.
Go be yourselves.
Yeah, pretty much.
And so, Rem, I want to pose this question to you. What was more successful, Biodome or Biosphere?
Biodome.
Oh, I would agree. I would agree.
I can't believe I stopped to
I would
think.
agree.
I was afraid it was a trick question.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I wish I had the effect turned up. I hit applause.
That's all good.
Because I was, yeah, woohoo, yeah.
I missed those little details.
I did. I do too. So, Yeah, that's where technology was going. We have rich people thinking they know what's best for everybody.
And that started a trend
Yes.
of rich people believing the same shit.
Yeah, by the way, do you know how this guy got rich? Theater.
Which guy?
The guy who funded Biosphere.
Doing live
Doing
like
like
Broadway?
all that stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sounds like an interesting person regardless.
Yep. But the last thing I just want to touch on real quick that he touched on, especially the mid-90s,
Yeah.
is he touched on how the mid-90s was really a lonely, depressing, and miserable place. And when I read that part of the
Mid
book,
to late, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
when I read that part of the book, I got chills
Because it brought up shit for you.
because it hit how I felt from 1995 to 1999 to varying degrees.
Yeah, my best friend killed himself in 99.
Yeah, 95 and 96, and kind of 97.
Yeah.
Those 2+ years were some of the most worst and miserable of my life.
Man, I know that, man. I know
Yeah.
that place.
And it's a lot of it was because one thing he brings up is one thing that is like a paradox for Gen Xers is the anti-establishment. Well, like he used like popular being like no, not he does bring up now to surf
I was
popular,
gonna say the song, yeah.
but he brings up like you don't being popular is uncool, but you still want to be popular.
Mm-hmm.
That's let's all just remove that veil of bullshit. You could be the most anti person or whatever.
Yeah, no, I'm
and
cool.
I'm cool and all that. And at deep down inside, you just want to be a trendsetter cool.
Yeah, you want to be sitting at the cool kids table at lunch.
Mhm. And that's something I struggled with because you know what? I wasn't cool. I was quirky. I had my things
Yeah.
on top of so it made it even more lonelier at times for me.
At that time was one of the things you had to deal with was like planning on going to college or figuring out what you were doing after.
And you had to deal with legit bullying and hazing.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. And you had to deal with it with boomer parents just saying, suck it up or kick their ass.
Don't be a
or
bitch.
Don't be a pussy.
Always.
Yep. So what you do, you internalize.
100%.
You just internalize things, and then you get ulcers and mental illness.
Then you get manic depression
Yeah.
and yeah.
And Chuck didn't go that deep into it, but he hit on it in a way where I was like, thank you.
And if I may, obviously, I think that just the grunge movement in itself sums up.
Yes.
We were young, and what happened was our parents went from hippies to yuppies very easily.
Mhm.
The house you were in, that you lived in, cost them $25K.
Yep.
And we suddenly saw this big spike, not like lately. Lately, it's been far worse, but a big spike where the houses that they were getting for 25, back then we had to spend 150. Now it's $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
But we saw that, and we also saw the prospect of we don't want to go be in $200,000 debt, college fucking loans,
No.
without knowing there's something out there. So do we go to college and be miserable? Do we not go to college and learn a trade and get miserable? It's the worst fucking time because you're figuring out where your next 10 years will be.
Do you know what he does towards the end of the book? Is he talks about American Beauty.
Yeah.
And he talks about, number one, one thing he does that he does a disservice to it, he does not acknowledge that it's satire. It's you can agree. It's satire.
To an extreme extent.
It's subtly extreme satire.
Mm-hmm.
Now he talks about the reason we can't support Kevin Spacey. He just touches upon we can't support Kevin Spacey, but he also says that he talks about it like it's real. Like in modern times, you can't obsess about your daughter's 16-year-old friend.
No, it's
you can't obsess about your daughter's 16-year-old friend at any time. That exists outside of time. But he also says that if you think about it, that what was going on in American Beauty represents kind of what was going on for the Clintons.
Yeah.
And really what represents what was going on for white upper middle class people. That was their life.
That's what suburban NUE.
Yep. Unhappy, unlovable marriages where people just,
The kids ignored.
Yep.
There's another thing. You just brought that up.
Yeah. And I wanted to tie that into this because
Can you stop
that plays a part.
bumping?
What if I make a beat? That's
Sorry,
actually
that actually sounded kinda cool.
That actually sounded really dope.
But yeah, and I think the thing about American Beauty, you realize you're like, oh, we watched that and it was normalized. It is scary to think that, like, at the end of the movie, he almost fools around with a teenage girl. And on top of that, though, and it's a satire, like, don't exploit teenage girls, but then it has that girl in the movie show her tits.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty sure she was young, dude.
I'm pretty sure that the meaning behind, by the way, spoiler alert for American Beauty, the meaning behind, when it's showing what everyone's doing when you get shot?
Yeah.
Like, do you know how she's like in the mirror and all that? I think she's just prepping herself for the next act.
Oh.
That's how I've always seen that.
That's cool.
I've always seen that as that wasn't genuinely her crying. That was, I think it was her being rejected.
Yeah.
And she wasn't used to being rejected. But I also see it as, okay, well, it didn't work, but I don't think he's 100% gonna say no.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, she's literally putting makeup on, putting herself back together.
And nice thought. And
Yeah.
we've already talked about how, like, because where we're going right now on the timeline, how Fight Club then was really a big decade ender.
He only mentions like 4 words about Fight Club.
That bums me out.
Yeah.
Because I feel like we did a whole episode about how it did a lot for the male generation to figure out, first of all, our sensitivity. The movie's about hugging motherfuckers and telling them everything is going to be okay,
Yeah.
But it's hidden behind a veneer of violence and machismo. So
It's
again,
hidden behind reality.
but
sadly.
again, you have a satire that's wickedly misunderstood.
I want to give him credit and just say, because I think for the era of Gen X that he is,
Yeah.
that it doesn't resonate the way it does for
us. That's fair.
Yes, that's where I want to be fair to him, because he talks about other things like he did talk about, and you can read about those, and if you've read those books and seen those movies,
Yeah.
he talks about those resonating with people his age,
Okay.
and that was like mid 90s.
And Reality Bites that more.
He
That
just
shit,
says
right?
that that's more like a this is what Gen X wanted to be, but it's like, why?
Yeah.
Yeah, because ultimately, like, she became a sellout when she sold out her friends with the documentary. Like,
No, it's a good
Yeah.
point, and that's the heart of the
Yeah.
story right there.
and she goes for the guy who's going to treat her terribly as opposed to the guy who's going to treat her well. Damn, that Ben Stiller, he was.
Yeah.
I don't think I give a Ben Stiller enough credit for like
No, he's
the stuff he
great.
did, the
He's
stuff he did in
great.
the 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That was when he did Permanent Midnight.
Mhm.
Wow. Like
even what was it, Heavyweights?
yeah.
Which, listen, Heavyweights a throwaway movie, but he was good in that movie.
But it's like you realize
Yeah.
now, you're like, wow, is that a movie where Ben Stiller just picked on fat kids for
It
2
was.
hours?
It was.
And
It
like
was. But let's be honest, he recreated it when he did Dodgeball.
everyone says that.
Yeah.
He brought it full circle.
Yeah.
He hates fat people and obviously thinks it's a running joke.
Yeah.
But so I wanted to ask you a couple more things because I know
Sure.
we're getting to the end of it. Had you mentioned something he had said about Radiohead? Or am I wrong?
Oh, I did.
Okay.
It was because in the book, when he's talking about cloning,
Yeah.
and he very briefly mentions Kid A, just like that Kid A
The whole album was about cloning.
was this atmospherically different album from anything they did. He actually said it was OK Computer.
yeah.
That people say Tom York wrote about cloning and evolution, and he actually got to talk with Tom York,
Yeah.
and Tom York just said, "Nah, it was just all nonsensical bullshit that I was talking about."
That's cool.
So all these people that have these ideals in there about what OK Computer could be about,
He just wrote an album.
just like, oh. But I would say if he was like I don't want to tear down Tom York. I'm not trying to. But if
He's
he was
pretentious. You can.
if he was a good artist, he would also back that up like other good artists do and say, but what it means to you matters more than what it
I
meant
agree.
to me.
I saw an interview with Paul
Like, I'm just
Simon.
the vessel.
Same thing happened.
That's what the Beatles used to say.
One of my favorite Paul Simon lyrics is, "There is a girl in New York City who calls herself the human trampoline. Sometimes when I'm falling and blah, 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 I know just what she means." Amazing line.
Well, Paul Simon is known for just come on, look at The Boxer.
That's what he said.
Like
But he said, when they asked about that line, he's like, a lot of people have that tattooed, a lot of people, and he's like, no, it just rhymed.
yeah, probably the same thing with like the Sounds of Silence.
Yeah.
Like, come on, and the signs of a prophet were written on a subway wall in tenement
Stop.
halls, or the sign flashing on a neon light.
Yeah.
But I would say my favorite, because I'm going to try not to go down the rabbit hole of Paul Simon, but like The Boxer, when he's basically talking about going to visit prostitutes when he's lonely, but he writes it in a way where it's like beautiful.
And it feels like you're doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I got on a tangent.
Yeah.
side.
No. There were times I was so lonesome, I took some comfort there. Yeah. Come on. That's a good way to go.
Yeah. Do what you got to do.
Paul
buddy.
Simon, 1960s, hanging out with whores.
Yeah.
But no, my favorite line of his is from Kodachrome.
Which is,
If you took all the girls I knew when I was single and put them all together for one night, I know they'd never match my sweet imagination, and everything looks worse in black and white. He's writing a song about Kodachrome cameras.
yeah.
Come on.
Sorry, guys.
Well
We're
done.
music people.
Well done. That's going to be a reel. You can make fun of us. It's fine.
Yeah, please do, actually.
All right. Not just because we're really hot.
I was just going to say, bro, it's getting rain.
But yeah, I feel like we've kind of talked about what is good for this book, because I want people to read this book.
I'm reading it this week.
And Remy's going to read because I gave him my copy. I'm going to reach out to Dave, just let you know. I think I'll give Dave an early kind of listen to some of the stuff we talked about.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if he didn't read the books, but he actually heard Chuck do an interview
Oh, shit.
on I want to say it was like internet radio. He was just interviewing with somebody where he was out pushing the book. It's been around.
Let's send this to Chuck
We could do that.
on his Instagram or on Twitter. See what he
Yeah,
thinks.
could send little excerpts about this. Yeah, because I appreciated that. As someone who technically is not Gen X, but I grew up in those times with different sets of eyes. There was a lot that you talked about that I thought was great. And you're a great You don't need me to wash
Yeah,
your ass or anything, but you're a great writer.
I need to
And
wash my ass.
And it was very captivating. So thank you, Mr. Klosterman.
Yeah, and I'm a huge fan of the stuff. And, this was just us saying thanks for another piece.
Yeah. All right. And for everyone else, sorry if we're beaming and sweaty. But until the next time,
Be
take
grateful you don't have smell-o-vision.
No.
All right.
All right. Take care.